Callum lifts his wine glass at our own dinner table and tells our guests that I have never once cared about money, so he handles everything important. Before he says it, he straightens the cuff of his left sleeve, the way he always does. Harold laughs from the head of the table. Two neighbors laugh with him. I smile and reach for my water glass instead of answering. Nobody at that table knows I have already started counting the years since I last saw a bank statement with my name alone on it. Callum keeps talking, telling everyone that investments are too complicated to explain over dinner, that the house and the accounts are handled correctly, that I never need to worry about the details. He says it like a gift he is giving me. I turn the silver ring on the chain around my neck once, slowly, and let him finish. The dinner is for his firm's biggest client, a couple from Boston who have never met me before tonight. Callum introduces me as his wife who runs the household, and lets that stand as the whole description. I pour more wine for the wife across from me and ask her about her garden instead of correcting him. This is easier than it should be by now. I have had years of practice choosing which battles are worth losing my composure over, and a dinner table in front of strangers has never once been one of them. For years, this has been the shape of our marriage. When the tax folder arrives every spring, Callum slides it across the table toward himself before I can even open the envelope. He tells me it is faster if he just handles the signatures himself. When I ask about the second property in Vermont, he says the paperwork is being finalized and changes the subject to something easier. When I mention wanting my own financial advisor, he tells me it would only complicate things, that we already have a system that works fine the way it is. To the people who know us, I am the calm wife of a careful man. Nobody sees the folder disappear into a study the moment dinner ends. Nobody sees the passwords I am never given, the accounts I am told exist somewhere but never shown. I see all of it. I have simply stopped mentioning what I see. There was a time early in our marriage when I asked more questions. I remember standing in the kitchen with a mortgage statement in my hand, asking why my name was not listed as a co-owner. Callum told me it was a tax strategy, something his accountant recommended, nothing that should worry me. I believed him because believing him was simpler than doubting a man I loved. That was 11 years ago. I have not seen a mortgage statement since. Every year since, he has renewed the same explanation without my asking, as if reminding me first would keep me from ever wondering again. There is a ritual to how Callum handles the mail, too. Every afternoon, he collects it from the box himself before I can reach it, sorting bills from catalogs from anything marked confidential, which he carries straight into his study without comment. I used to assume this was simple efficiency, a man tidying his own desk. I understand now that it was also a filter, a way of deciding in advance which parts of our shared life I was allowed to see. Once, at a friend's dinner party, another wife asks me what Callum does with our investments, expecting me to know. I give her a vague answer about diversification, a word I picked up from one of his old emails, and she nods like it satisfies her. Later in the car, Callum tells me I handled that well. He means it as a compliment. I understand it as proof that he expects me to keep performing ignorance for the rest of our marriage, and that he has never once considered what it costs me to do it. There is a smaller moment too, one I only understand the full weight of much later. My sister calls that same month asking for advice about her own divorce, wanting to know how much she should insist on seeing before she signs anything. I tell her to ask for everything, every account, every statement, because a marriage should never leave one person guessing. Callum overhears the end of the call from the hallway and later tells me that advice was harsh, that not every situation is adversarial, that some couples simply trust each other. I agree with him out loud. In my head, I am already wondering why trust in our house has only ever flowed in one direction. A month before that dinner, Callum decided we should sell my late mother's cottage on the coast, the one property that had only ever been mine. He framed it as practical, said an unused house was just money sitting idle, and I let him list it because arguing felt harder than agreeing. The proceeds went into what he called our shared reserve account, an account I have never once been shown a statement for. I think about that cottage sometimes, the porch where my mother used to sit with her coffee, sold and folded into a system I am not permitted to see. That night, after the Boston couple leaves and Harold stays behind for coffee, He tells me how lucky I am to have married a man who thinks ahead. Callum puts his hand on my shoulder and says the same thing he always says when he wants a conversation closed. Trust me, he says. I always plan ahead. I nod and clear the plates. I do not know yet how true that sentence is, or how far ahead his planning actually goes. Harold pats my hand on his way out and tells me Callum was always the responsible one, even as a boy, always the one who saved his allowance while his brother spent his in a week. Weeks pass in this same rhythm, dinners and small dismissals stacking quietly on top of each other until they stop registering as anything unusual at all. Even Iris, on one of our regular coffee mornings, tells me I seem tired lately, and I tell her it is only work, because naming the real weight out loud has never once made it lighter. The following week, I ask to see the retirement account summary, only to update my own records for a work form. Callum tells me the accountant is behind on paperwork this quarter and promises to bring it home Friday. Friday comes and goes without the folder. I do not ask again. I have learned that asking twice earns me a longer explanation and no document at all. The morning everything changes starts like any other. Callum is running late for a client meeting, printing something in his home office before he leaves. The printer jams, the way it always does when it is rushed, and he swears under his breath and goes to check it in the hallway closet where we keep the paper trays. His laptop stays open on the desk, still logged in, the screen simply asleep from a few minutes of stillness. I walk past the office to bring him his coffee mug, and the screen wakes on its own when my hand brushes the desk. An email sits open from a corporate lawyer I have never heard of. The subject line reads Transfer of Ownership, Blue Cedar Holdings. Below it is a list of addresses. I recognize 3 of them immediately because I have stood in their kitchens, because I chose the paint color for one of their bedrooms. The timestamps on the file go back almost 2 years. I do not take out my phone. I do not gasp or call his name down the hallway. I stand very still and read the list twice, memorizing the order of the addresses the way I once memorized grocery lists. This is not a mistake or an oversight. A man does not accidentally move 3 properties into a holding company over 2 years. I understand, standing in that office with his coffee going cold in my hand, that my husband has been building an exit for himself, quietly, patiently, while telling me at every dinner that he was only protecting our future. One of the property files still uses a photo from our honeymoon as its folder icon, the 2 of us on a beach in Portugal, smiling like people who trusted each other completely. My first instinct is to scroll further, to open the attached deed and read every line, but I stop myself before my finger reaches the trackpad. Touching anything now would leave a trace of its own, a changed timestamp, a file marked as recently viewed by an account that is not his. I memorize instead. 3 addresses, 1 holding company, a date that keeps repeating itself near the top of every document. My hand is steady on the coffee mug even though nothing else about me feels steady at all. Down the hallway I can hear him still fighting with the printer, muttering the same 3 or 4 words he always uses when a machine will not cooperate. I have perhaps 30 seconds before he gives up and comes back for the laptop. I use them to read the list one final time, then step back from the desk exactly to where I was standing before, coffee mug in hand, as if nothing in this house has changed in the last 2 minutes, even though everything has. Callum comes back from the hallway still muttering about the printer, closes the laptop without noticing the coffee mug shaking slightly in my hand, and kisses my cheek on his way out the door. I tell him to have a good meeting. My voice does not shake at all, and that surprises me more than the documents did. I do not call a friend that night. I do not confront him over dinner. I sit in the car outside Maeve Holloway's office 2 days later, having told Callum I am running errands, and I walk in without an appointment. Maeve has known me since college, long before she became a family attorney, and she listens to the whole story without interrupting once. When I finish, she opens a blank legal pad and runs her thumbnail along the bottom edge of the page before writing a single word. "Do not rush this," she says. "If he has been planning for 2 years, we can let him finish making his own mistake." She explains that anger is expensive in a courtroom. Patience is the only leverage I actually have right now, and the moment I confront him is the moment every hidden account gets harder to trace. I ask her what I am supposed to do instead. She tells me to start documenting quietly, to say nothing at home, and to let her bring in someone who understands where money likes to hide. Before I leave, Maeve asks me one more question. She wants to know if I am certain, because once we start pulling this thread, there is no way to put it back. I tell her I have never been more certain of anything, and she writes that down too, dating the page at the top corner the way she dates every page in her file. That someone Maeve mentioned is Rowan Pierce, a forensic financial consultant she has worked with for a decade. We meet in a coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere neither of us is likely to run into anyone we know. Rowan turns his cup slowly on the table without drinking from it. Shell companies leave trails even when they are built to disappear, he tells me. He asks me to describe exactly what I saw on that screen, and I recite the addresses from memory, in order, the way I memorized them standing in that office. The blue cedar filings will take weeks to fully unravel, Rowan tells me, but what I already saw on that screen is enough to start. He does not promise me an easy path. He promises me a thorough one, and after 2 years of being told my questions were too complicated to answer, thorough is the only thing I actually want. Over the following weeks we meet twice more, always in the same coffee shop, always at a table near the back. Rowan brings printouts instead of a laptop because paper leaves no browser history for anyone at home to stumble across. Harold calls one evening that same month, just to talk, the way he sometimes does, and spends most of the call telling me how proud he is that Callum has finally closed some new business venture, a fund he has apparently been building quietly for over a year. I say all the right things, congratulate a stranger's version of my husband, and hang up wondering how many people have heard that same proud phone call, and how few of them know what the fund is actually holding. I ask him once how long he thinks this has actually been planned, longer than the 2 years the paperwork shows. He tells me the paper only proves what someone was willing to put in writing, and that intentions usually start long before anyone files anything. I do not ask him to guess beyond that. Some answers I am not ready to hear yet, even from a stranger who owes me nothing but the truth. There is one afternoon when the whole plan nearly comes apart. Rowan calls the house phone instead of the second number, an honest mistake on his part, and Callum happens to be the one who picks it up. Rowan is careful enough to say only that he is following up on a consulting inquiry and asks for me by name, nothing more. I take the phone into another room and tell Callum it is about a market research project for my old firm. He accepts the explanation without much interest, but for an hour afterward my hands do not stop shaking, and I understand for the first time exactly how much I now have to lose if a single detail slips. After that call, Rowan and I agree on a stricter rule. No numbers he does not already have saved under a name that means nothing to anyone else. No calls to the house under any circumstance, no matter how small the reason. It is a narrow mistake, corrected quickly, but it teaches me something Maeve had already tried to explain in words. A plan this quiet only survives as long as every single person inside it treats it as fragile. One night Callum goes through the pockets of my coat while looking for his own car keys, turning out receipts and a crumpled grocery list before giving up. He finds nothing, because by then I keep everything either on my body or locked in a drawer at Iris's apartment. He does not mention the search afterward, and neither do I, but the fact that he did it at all tells me the flowers and the weekend trip were never really about affection. I begin keeping a second phone, one Callum does not know exists, in a drawer at Maeve's office instead of at home. Every document I can photograph without raising suspicion goes into a folder Rowan manages for me, labeled with a case number instead of my name, just in case anyone else ever opens his files by accident. Some evenings, after Callum falls asleep in front of the television, I sit at the kitchen table and write down anything I remember from the day, small things that would mean nothing to a stranger, but everything to Maeve. The name of a bank he mentioned on a phone call I was not meant to hear. A courier envelope that arrived and disappeared into his study before I could see the return address. None of it feels dramatic while I am doing it. It feels like the same quiet attentiveness I have practiced for years, only now it is finally working in my favor instead of his. 3 weeks into this quiet work, Daphne Mercer calls. She runs the regional division of a company I have consulted for twice, and she offers me the kind of position I stopped believing I would ever be considered for. A director role with a salary that would have embarrassed me to mention at one of our dinners a year ago. We meet at her office, and before she says a single word about the offer, she sets her glasses down exactly in the center of her desk, squared to the edge, the way she does before anything important. She tells me the position is confidential until my official start date, since the company has not announced the reorganization publicly. I do not tell Callum. I sign the contract in Maeve's office instead of bringing it home. Daphne asks me, almost as an afterthought while I am signing, if everything is all right at home. I tell her everything is fine, and she does not push, though something in her expression tells me she has heard that exact sentence before, from other women, in other offices, and never quite believed it either time. The role itself starts in 3 months, which gives me a window I did not expect to have. I use it to learn the systems I will inherit, sitting in on calls under a temporary consulting title, so nothing about my name appears on the company directory yet. My future team does not know who their new director will be. Daphne insists on this level of discretion herself, telling me that reorganizations leak the moment a single name gets typed into the wrong email chain, and that she has seen good hires ruined by office gossip before the person even walks in the door. For once, someone else's caution works entirely in my favor. A new bank account opens the same week at an institution Callum has never used, under my name only. Iris Bennett, my closest friend since we were 19, offers her apartment as a mailing address for anything I cannot risk arriving at the house. She adjusts the sleeve of her sweater with her fingertips while she says it, like it costs her nothing, though I know it means she is choosing a side. Iris does not ask me for details. She simply hands me a spare key to her building and tells me to use her guest room whenever I need somewhere that is not that house. We set up a small system between us. Every piece of mail that arrives for me at her address, she photographs before opening anything, so I always know what has come in before I decide when it is safe to collect it. Twice a week, I tell Callum I am meeting Iris for coffee, which is not even a lie, only an incomplete version of the truth. Callum notices something shifting, though he cannot name it. He starts asking more questions about my schedule, wanting to know where I have been on ordinary afternoons. He proposes a spontaneous weekend trip, something we have not done in years, and I go, because refusing would tell him more than going does. On that trip he watches me across restaurant tables in a way that feels less like affection and more like an audit, and once, in the hotel room, he picks up my phone from the nightstand and sets it down again without unlocking it, as if testing whether I would react. I answer every question calmly and offer nothing extra, because Maeve taught me that the surest way to break a lie is to never let the liar see you flinch. He begins staying home more often instead of working late. He brings home flowers twice in 1 month, something he has not done since our 5th anniversary. I thank him both times and put them in the same vase I have used for a decade, and I let him believe the flowers are working. The closest call comes on an ordinary Thursday, when a bank letter meant for my new account arrives at the house instead of Iris's apartment, a single digit wrong on a form I filled out weeks earlier in a hurry. It sits on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail for 11 minutes before I find it, my name printed above an account number Callum has never seen, and I slide it into my bag a full minute before he walks in asking what is for dinner. I do not sleep well that night, replaying how close 11 minutes actually is. I already have a new job, a separate account, and an apartment lined up under Iris's name by the time Rowan finishes tracing the last transfer, connecting every property, every signature, every dated filing back to Callum directly. None of it exists anywhere Callum could find it in an evening of searching our shared computer. The night before the mediation, Maeve calls me at Iris's apartment to walk through what will happen in the room. She tells me not to react to anything Callum says, no matter how convincing it sounds, because a mediator watches faces as closely as documents. She reminds me that Rowan's timeline is airtight, that every date has a matching filing behind it, and that the only thing that could weaken our position tomorrow is me. I tell her I understand. She tells me she knows I do, and that she would not have let this go to mediation yet if she thought otherwise. The mediation meeting happens on a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled conference room downtown. Present are both attorneys, a court-appointed mediator, Rowan, sitting in as the financial expert who built the timeline, and Harold, who insisted on coming to support his son. Callum wears the suit he wore to our wedding, which I recognize immediately and which he clearly does not. He tells the room his financial disclosures are complete and accurate, and before the sentence is finished he straightens his cuff again, the same small motion from that dinner 2 years ago. Maeve runs her nail along the edge of the folder in front of her, the second time I have watched her do it, and nods once to the mediator. The documents go up on the screen at the front of the room, pulled directly from the official property registry the mediation software is connected to, so every person present sees them at the same moment Callum does. Formation dates for 3 holding companies. Transfer records for the properties. A financial trail that Rowan has organized into a single unbroken timeline. Electronic signatures, all of them Callum's own, on every filing. The screen shows the Vermont property first. The one he told me for 2 years was still being finalized. Beside the transfer date sits a second entry, a refinancing filed only 4 months ago, the same week he suggested the spontaneous weekend trip. Harold reads one page slowly, folds his hands over it, and stops looking at his son entirely. Nobody in the room raises their voice. The mediator sets down her pen. Rowan asks everyone to return to the first exhibit, the earliest transfer, dated almost exactly 2 years before the dinner where Callum told our guests I had never cared about finances. Harold checks that date against something in his own memory, mouthing a month to himself, and I watch him realize it lands only days after the dinner where his son put a hand on my shoulder and promised he always planned ahead. Callum looks at the screen for a long moment and says nothing. This is the first time in our marriage I have watched him fail to produce an explanation. One exhibit shows his electronic signature timestamped 3 minutes after he told the mediator, earlier in the same meeting, that he had never restructured any of our shared assets. Nobody needs to say out loud what that timestamp means. It sits on the screen for everyone to read. Rowan does not comment on it either. He simply stands beside the screen with his arms folded, letting 15 months of work speak for itself. Somewhere behind me I hear Harold's chair scrape back before anyone else's, though he says nothing yet. Callum's own attorney asks for a short recess. Callum does not move from his chair when everyone else stands. He stares at the screen as if it might change if he waits long enough, and for the first time since I have known him, he looks like a man with nothing left to plan. When the room reconvenes, Rowan walks through the timeline one entity at a time, matching each formation date to a corresponding withdrawal from an account I had always been told was underperforming and not worth my attention. Callum's attorney tries once to characterize the transfers as standard estate planning. The mediator asks him to point to a single document supporting that claim, and he cannot produce one because none exists. He asks for a private word with his client instead, and when they return, he tells the room, quietly, that he cannot dispute the authenticity of any exhibit presented. The mediator states for the record that the undisclosed entities will need to be added to Callum's financial disclosures in full, along with every transfer traced back to their formation. Callum's attorney does not object. There is nothing left to object to. I watch something in Callum's posture give way, the same straightness he has carried through every dinner and every argument, and for the first time I understand that the outcome of this case was decided months ago, in a coffee shop 2 towns over, long before either attorney said a word today. Maeve stands only once during the entire session, to submit the printed timeline into the official record. She does not raise her voice or add commentary. She simply places the folder in front of the mediator, taps it once with 2 fingers, and sits back down, letting 15 months of quiet work speak for itself in a language no one in that room can argue with. Harold takes a glass of water during the recess without drinking from it, turning it slowly in his hand. He asks the mediator, quietly, whether any of this affects the trust he set up for his grandchildren years ago, and she tells him that is a separate matter for another day. Before the room reconvenes, he leans toward me for just a moment and says he is sorry, though I understand even as he says it that the apology is not really his to give. The meeting ends there, the outcome already written into the record, But Harold does not speak to his son on the way out. Callum catches up to me in the parking garage as I am unlocking my car. He says we can still fix this, that we can talk it through privately, away from lawyers and screens. He asks me to come home. We can start over, he says, and for a moment his voice sounds almost like it did on our wedding day. I ask him why. Why 2 years? Why the honeymoon photo left on a folder icon he never bothered to change? Why he let me sit through every dinner believing we were building something together while he was quietly taking it apart? He does not have an answer that survives being said out loud. He tells me it was never about leaving me, only about protecting himself in case things went wrong, as if 2 years of silence could ever be mistaken for protection. I let him finish. I do not interrupt him, the way he interrupted every question I ever asked him about our own life. Somewhere in the middle of his answer he reaches for my hand, and I let him hold it for exactly as long as it takes him to realize I am not going to hold it back. I reach up and unclasp the silver ring from the chain around my neck, the one I stopped wearing on my finger years ago, the one I have turned in my hand every time I needed to make a hard decision quietly. I place it in his open palm and close his fingers around it myself. You plan to leave me with nothing, I tell him. I simply finished planning first. I turn and walk toward my car without waiting to see his face. The next morning, I unlock the door to my new office before anyone else arrives. What Callum never understood, in all those months of watching me more closely, is that he taught me how to disappear. I learned it by watching him do it first. What would you have done in that office, standing there with his coffee in your hand? Tell me in the comments, and if this story kept you here until the end, give it a like and subscribe for the next one.